Art Deco. I've been wondering what it was for 15 years since I played BioShock, and I've finally bothered to learn. I'd heard the name here and there, but I could never form a clear picture in my mind. All I could think of was these big, bold shapes all jammed next to each other. And there was that text, that really tall text with the bold serifs and there were these things everywhere. But I've studied the style of 6 Art Deco games, and to show you I'm serious, I read 1 book. And now for a program where art meets innovation. These spaces at their best reflect the technology that drives games forward, but also the delicate touch that keeps our humanity in check. But before we get to the flashy details, let's look at the structures, the core elements that hold the style together. And fortunately, we have a game that does just that. Johan Hjarpe created Filcher as a love letter to one of their favorite genres, the immersive sim. But to create such an ambitious game single-handedly, they embraced Art Deco as a style that would facilitate an entire city rendered in bold shapes, simple lines, and a deliberate lack of detail. Art historians created the term Art Deco to describe the early electrified city, buildings rebuilt bigger and bolder to draw the eyes of urbanites from blocks away. And the techniques they used to do so were innovated by German artisans, using new materials like metal and glass to create furniture and detail pieces, the shape language of which would soon be translated and expanded to cohesive interior and exterior designs citywide. Countries industrializing after World War I would develop these techniques and expand them on a grand scale, leading to international cultural expositions that glorified the finest arts that these designers and architects were honing, in addition to the traditional arts still valued for their beauty and lightness of touch. The Art Deco stereotype is the excesses of the Jazz Age, a giant city so drenched in excess that the whole stock market crashed under its weight. But having read a little bit more about it, I see it now as a beautiful crossover, traditional arts meeting bold new forms. As always, the iconic images had context. And the flashy facades, too, served a human purpose. Those big images were meant to stop commuters in their tracks at the street level, mesmerizing them with the sheer material power that these movers and shakers possessed. And waving your cash in the faces of your guests is all a bit gauche, but it works great for a game about stealing. The heavy repeated patterns make it easy to tell what's interactive in Filcher, and even the props, so tiny and rendered in low fidelity, use light and contrast to make looting a pleasure. And that's the reward after the challenge of sneaking. Sneaking here feels natural. When you look at bold floor patterns and symmetrical props like this, you can tell exactly how long it will take you to move through them. The lack of characters and animation means that so much thought is given to the direction of light, the small details that make spaces feel unique, and even emptiness becomes an evocative moment. It's a bittersweet thing to line your own pockets and eat the rich, but the pleasure of this game is in knowing that both you and these grand spaces around you will all be lost in time. The strangeness of it, the warped, forced perspective, plays into that. It doesn't feel natural or homey, but as soon as you get past the initial distortions, it starts to feel comforting in its own strange way. The symmetry, the repetition, it all forms this dreamlike singular focus that goes well with the main character, who herself is a persona crafted by a normal person in order to fulfill a very specific need she has in her working life. And for better or worse, the Art Deco period was much about that, the separation of the self, the family, and the natural from the urbane. And it's that stripped-down focus that helped me enjoy this game more than I did Thief. Although I admired Thief's high fantasy and magic-heavy world-building, its stiffness of movement always made that feel too limited, which was a common problem for the immersive sim as a whole, famous for being beautifully programmed, but also, drawn by programmers. Here is the lead animator of BioShock, a noted AAA game, talking about his background in animation.
We didn't have a tech animator, it was me. I'd never rigged characters before, and now I'm rigging characters trying to figure out how, to get all these characters out. Right.
But that's the strength of Art Deco in a nutshell. It's perfect for games with limited animation to craft environments that are so heavy and stable and powerful that they feel complete without being inhabited. And that can feel intimidating, overwhelming, but that's perfect for a game that wants you to ponder great concepts rather than engage more intimately with human characters. That's why we don't hang out in pure Art Deco spaces very often. It would feel weird to hear witty, relatable banter coming from people inside a space as grandiose as this. And even those who loved Deco had to bid it goodbye. The ruthlessness of the market just had to strip away old buildings for new, and the limitations of early construction techniques meant that many of its electric and HVAC needs simply weren't up to code in the following decades. Those halogen bulbs might have burned a lot of oil to keep running, but they did make those facades look great. If you're sick of the Jazz Age cliches for nostalgia and humanity's peak, there's a game that might give you a more delicate sensation of those tender feelings on an intimate scale. Transistor was the second project by Supergiant Games, and it's a much more painterly, detailed approach to Art Deco. Indeed, using a range of stylized camera angles to help us appreciate floors, in addition to its cut-in inserts for narrative moments that show us the legacy of Art Nouveau and traditional techniques that offset the harsh industrial materials with a delicate organic sensibility. But the pulled-back perspective emphasizes the city as a character, and this was the age of the skyscraper. Even interior designers could not resist. Furniture and detail work constantly evoked the image of rising and grasping ever upwards. But it's tough to make a tall building feel good in a video game. Ultimately, it's a repetitive, artificial structure. Exploring one in a 3D environment can just feel flat and repetitive. How do you make something truly feel tall and grand? Transistor doesn't let us interact with its environment, so instead they put an enormous amount of detail work into light and shadow, movement and animation, so you really get the interactive feel of a city that is slowly falling apart under the weight of its own ambition gone awry. It's a very directed, controlled experience, but lets you interact just often enough to get a feel for the human stories that are being lost in this industrial rush.
I've seen no one. But when I look up to where the sky should be, I see you.
Characters get minimal screen time, but they're all defined by their ambition, and they're literally translated to the mechanics as destructive tools, shaping what's left of the environment. The environments overall place a huge emphasis on what's left of the power slowly bleeding dry. Light sources, ornate props. If you don't like the combat, there's not too much to grab onto here, but it's a good way to fill otherwise minimally interactive spaces. And what few heightened story moments there are incredibly detailed, with these animated cutaways, absolutely dripping with detail that suddenly creates these vivid, lively moments. And the combat system itself forces you to think like a big destructive industrialist, drawing lines and angles, grouping enemies together, and using your tools in bold synthesis for dramatic effect. Your power budget is high, but your character is small. She's both dwarfed by the environment that surrounds her, and every narrative moment emphasizes how it shaped her and how she's still trying to make something of this place instead of just leaving. They make you want to know who these characters are by giving them such elaborately constructed, detailed garments, and their city being full of rich metalwork and delicate glass. And everybody wants their game to have a diverse palette of materials and colors, but it takes a softness of light and fluid blending of color like this to really make it feel cohesive and not gaudy or overbearing. Likewise, the top-down perspective is used to make a very linear sequence of fights feel more engaging. Props like this lead you from one point to another, and contrast of the dense moments with stark, sparse ones like these makes you feel like you never know what's around the next corner. God, what a beautiful game. I need a break. Can we look at some commercials? Art Deco was a fantastic period for commercial illustration. The rise of neon and poster design are absolute staples of the style. Whether you're trying to sell healthy, nutritious cigarettes or wild new technologies, you need a good poster, and the graphic designers of this era were constantly innovating with their combination of hand lettering and mechanical reproduction. This one typeface that you've likely seen before was actually drawn in the 70s as a throwback to Art Deco, and used to great effect in the Batman cartoon of the 90s. Plaza nailed all of those Art Deco traits, the tall, ambitious skyscraper silhouette and the jaunty, sharp serifs to keep you guessing. Its cousins are still with us today, but contrast it with something like the delicate, previous generation's lettering, like the works of Alphonse Mucha. He was trying to sell to pedestrians who had time to linger, no phones or computer to get home to. Instead, they could luxuriate in these urban spaces where the Art Deco designer had to keep up with a relentless pace. As we see in the pure rectangular legibility of Gill Sans, or the quirky circles of Futura, designed to easily distinguish film students so you don't accidentally have to have a conversation with them. But if one person came to typify Art Deco in typography, it was A.M. Cassandra. So many type artists are one-hit wonders, but every piece by him I saw seemed to have a new, brilliant stroke. Truly, we would have no My Life as a Teenage Robot title cards without him. His family actually have a tribute website for him, which is very sweet and educational, but it's hilarious to see huge blocks of text rendered in these stylized fonts. Like, imagine reading an entire visual novel in this typeface. Thankfully, we don't have to. Lady Killer in a Bind by the inimitable Christine Love uses a very plain Jane typeface for its body text, but uses the more stylized Art Deco type for its highlight moments. Each character is introduced with a splashy cutout like so, and because of the game's narrative, they all go by aliases, so you get these interactive moments where you get to parse through the text and even type it in yourself, making you feel like you're in on the literary appeal. It's set in the modern day, but on a cruise liner, and it's clear from the background art that Art Deco was a major point of reference. Here we see the fancy gold and brass accents on small, intimate details like doors and light fixtures, but note also the prevalence of curves. This is what would come to be called the streamline style. Even though we are literally on a boat in this example, the prominence of ocean liners as a luxury destination bled into interior and furniture design for many contexts, most notably the classic Americana diner that's still with us today. But no example shines quite so brightly as the Johnson Wax headquarters building, designed by the man himself, your favorite, Frank Lloyd Wright, in the 1930s. Johnson Wax is a marvel in curvature, built out of heavy industrial materials, but maintaining that sleek feeling of movement and energy. And it's that dynamism that's at the heart of Lady Killer in a Bind. It's a much more prosaic, funny story than our previous nostalgic melodrama, but these characters are wealthy, they're privileged, and we can laugh at that. They are literally trapped at sea with nothing to do but torment each other and indulge themselves to the point of pure comedy. We will return to discuss this game's narrative intricacies at a later date, but for now, let's focus on art. We wouldn't have any of these award-winning excellence in narrative gay sex games without the rich tapestry of narrative games which preceded them. And indeed, early narrative games were a stylistic hotbed of innovation. Because the 90s had primitive 3D rendering techniques, they often took stylized approaches to compensate, and Grim Fandango is a great example. Each background only has to be rendered from a single perspective, so they chose Art Deco with its incredibly high detail work to fill some of that flat quietness that limited animation can create. Lead designer Tim Schafer was enamored with the noir movies of the 40s that are associated with Deco in America, but also with calavera art, the traditional Mexican form that has a timeless beauty and forms a nice counterpoint to the stiffness of Deco itself. Historically speaking, Mexico City was a thriving metropolis when much of the world at large was still recovering from World War II. Frank Lloyd Wright himself was inspired by traditional architecture of Central America and tried to integrate it in what came later to be called the Pueblo Deco or Mayan Revival style. It could be a bit incongruous to have this kind of stonework inside a modern living room. Frank Lloyd Wright was never a man to let his clients' needs get in the way of the vision. But it could work at times. This beautiful frieze is my new favorite thing, the Mayan-inspired pattern of this clock. Really just a great period for outdoor clocks. But Frank wasn't the only big American ego in town.
I am Andrew Ryan, and I'm here to ask you a question. Is a man not entitled to
Well, his great chain of industry?
No.
Pervert.
BioShock brought Art Deco fully into the third dimension. You control the camera, you can affect the environment, and that was possible thanks to an unusually long prototyping stage in this game's pre-production. The good folks from Boston's own Irrational Games were thankfully candid about their history in later years. After their innovative work on the video essayist's favorite games, System Shock 2, they tried desperately to find a publisher to let them expand on the ideas they had first innovated. Immersive sims, like Art Deco architects, think functionalism. If it's in the space, you should be able to do something with it. And that sounds natural for a video game, but that means more programming, more variables. Sometimes games just want you to look at the scenery because it's beautiful. But after finally securing funding, Irrational took a divide-and-conquer approach. The core team of programmers made systems and environments, while the art team slowly came in to layer texture and detail on top. And because the team managed to stick together and keep the lights on for so long, they had great knowledge of their limits. They embraced Deco as a style that would let them create heavy geometry. Artists wouldn't have to come up with an endless list of textures and lighting systems because their heavy metals and bold strokes would create environments engaging on a pure three-dimensional level. And it's here we can start to appreciate the architect's sense of the city as a functioning organism. The bold foyers are what you think of when you think Art Deco, but those spaces are connected by more intimate small ones and transitory ones, like the rundown docks of the fisheries, the cramped metal pipes of engineering, and the wide-open, airy public spaces of transit. It's very successful overall, but the weaknesses of the game come into play during the periods of most intense interactivity. Like in Arcadia, you have this big fetch quest to collect several things, but because the levels are these mazes sandwiched vertically on top of each other, it becomes incredibly difficult to keep track of where you are, where you were, and where you're trying to get. Like, this map tells the whole story. The miniature itself should not have to compensate for any overall complications. But like any dev team, Irrational were having to develop many systems and assets simultaneously. And there was an effort to course correct. Like, look at how many of these doorways have these big neon signposts scattered all around, but because there are so many important transitional spaces stacked together here, the signs kind of run together. It's not easy to create a mental map on a muscle level. And those problems get even worse in the widely criticized last level. The material palette becomes sadly repetitive here, although the functionalist ethos is still in effect. Every room you go to has a clear industrial or scientific purpose, and it's a nice way to deliver story without having too much interactivity. The background is a creepy invocation of the human cost to industry and progress, and I think that alone refutes this game's bad rap as a libertarian fantasy, but on a gameplay level, these rooms are just a series of similarly sized rectangles. They lack the dynamism that drove the earlier parts of the game. But of course, this is why we saved the best for last. The game is most successful in spaces like Fort Frolic. As we mentioned before, the BioShock team could not animate characters. So instead of avoiding character, they asked themselves, how can we make the layout itself engage with the player? And this dynamic central chamber is at first inviting, and then it explodes into a fight before rewarding you, then pushing you down its adjacent corridors into differently decorated areas. Sander Cohen actually plays host to you. And that's what good architecture is about, not just creating awe-inspiring structures, but facilitating human interactions, whether it's Sander Cohen's strange hospitality or Andrew Ryan's grandiose industrialism. It's that sense of personality that makes this game appealing to come back to, and what I feel is unfortunately absent in BioShock 2. Shock 2 has much stronger detail work. The props are more intricately crafted with lots of good effects, but although the environment has been richly textured and we see more period reference, I don't get that same sense of character. It's definitely worth a visit for the fan, but as for the third depiction of the city in the BioShock Infinite DLC, I gotta be straight with you, I lost my copy of that game, and I draw the line at paying for BioShock Infinite twice, so let's move on. The commercial success of Shock in 2007 led to something of a renaissance for the genre, and that's great because immersive sim developers love to be in creative discourse with one another. And much as the French designers innovated on the German industrial techniques in the original Art Deco period, the French designers of Arcane Studios would innovate on those classic techniques for their own work. In this case, a fast-paced action game with witty, relatable dialogue.
Son of a fuck! What the fuck's my name?
These games released on the same day. A coincidence so strange that it might lead one to speculate whether one developer was finished with formal experimentation after several years in the lab, and the other was forced screaming out the door by a giant publishing conglomerate with shareholders to please, but Arcane Studios' track record speaks for itself. They are the level designer's level designer, and this game had never quite grabbed me with its opening moments, but I wanted to sincerely engage with it. And in slowing down, I found these interiors thoughtfully composed. The lighting and props are staggering in their variety, and they give you the human sense of people who both valued innovation and boldness in style, but comfort and intimacy. You get a sense of relationships and human needs on an intimate scale that none of our preceding examples managed to nail in such an ambitious project. Again, immersive sims are usually weak in the intimate human scale department. They're all focused on the thrill of science and technology, the radical places where no man has gone before, but here we see an incredible craftsman-like detail. Spaces are so breathing and inviting that when the action kicks in, it feels like a true explosion of unexpected energy. The neon lights and splashy text everywhere feels like it's earned by the energy of combat suddenly erupting, these wide open-air spaces turning into dynamic battlefields. And once the action dies down, there's enough interactive detail work that it still feels engaging to explore, like a detective. But as we've learned from many high-profile, ambitious action games with open worlds, that attention to detail has to come back in terms of opportunity cost somewhere else. Even in this game's first 2 hours, I got an uneven experience of detailed explorations followed by long backtracks through areas that hadn't been recontextualized. I often felt like I could just sidestep things that were important. It's sad to see these detailed spaces largely go to waste in terms of interactivity. The devs have clearly done their homework, but when I step into a space like this one, I get that same feeling of misguided signposting that I got in the weakest parts of BioShock. There's all these nice art assets, but they're scattered all over the place, and the user interface is the absolute low point of this. God, what an eyeful. There are so many elements jam-packed together, and in a design style known for having bold single words that grab your attention, I consider this an inexcusable sin. This tells the story of producers afraid that players couldn't retain information, so they had to bury them in it. In addition to the social gaming, always online bullshit that's tacked on to everything, it just creates a hollow, unfinished beta kind of impression. And I'm afraid I get that same sense from the story, which is a good concept, but feels like a rough first draft that the actors haven't had time to help refine. Here's the pitch. You play as 2 characters, 2 bold movers and shakers who changed the world but had an unspecified conflict that's made them mortal enemies, and now you get to slowly unravel what happened between them. But this is a big-budget action game, so we gotta cut to the chase and have a lot of witty, relatable dialogue.
This time I'll let you see yourself out.
Yup, we dated.
The idea is new and fresh. I like that it's different, and ImSims can feel very cold and contemplative, but dialogue-heavy games have to be focused on characterization. You can't have your cake and eat it too. These worlds, these characters, and their collective backstory are staggering in scale, and that itself is enough to sink your teeth into. But when you try to also cram a snappy, dialogue-driven action movie into the middle of these kinds of spaces, you get a weird, painful gear grinding in between these moments. The fun moments feel fake in a way that I can't communicate here because they just come out of nowhere. I knew these developers' previous work and that they must have been capable of better things. So it was this half-hearted experience with Deathloop that got me to finally play the game they made immediately prior to it, Prey, and I am so glad I did. Prey nails the big picture in a way that Deathloop failed to. In addition to having stunning set pieces and creative detail work in every single room, it's clear that this game had just the right amount of time in the oven for everybody to be on the same page. The familiar furnishings and splashy patterns of Art Deco are on full display here, but it's been synthesized into a completely new design experience. Every prop fills a niche, and every room is absolutely stuffed to bursting with interactables, pieces of lore, delicate lighting, high contrast, a wealth of materials, and although the assets are reused, it is still a video game after all. Even after 20 hours, I still felt like a tourist with my little camera, just marveling at every piece of detail work. And even in pixel peeping the props, I never lost track of the context. Every room is telling you about who lived in it, who's making use of it now, where you're moving forward, and what you're trying to get your hands on. And even on a basic game design level, this game is about survival and combat, and the enemies are perfectly differentiated from the interior design. They're these squiggling organic shapes, and the hardness and linearity of the environments they move through makes them so easy to distinguish, even in low light, even on a blurry resolution or a bad frame rate. It's so easy to tell the danger from the stability. And every interactable has that level of thought behind it. A chair or a lamp is something that you could technically pick up and throw in many games, but they so often blend into the scenery. But each form here, each shape is so clearly delineated that it just makes you want to reach out and touch something, to move forward and go to every space stretching out before you. Even a simple hallway feels like a bespoke experience, from the dark corridor to the zero-G gravity tunnel, to the staggering Grand Central Station that forms the heart of the environment. You never feel like you're backtracking through a repetitive space. You feel like you're learning how this ecosystem is connected and who inhabited it. The cast of this game feels more alive with purpose and drive than most games I've played, even though 90% of them are dead. Offices are usually boring, but the way that they're lit here, the way that props are constantly varied in their scale and arrangement, makes people's working lives feel like something special, something unique. Every time I backtrack through a hub area, I'm still chewing on the information from the last place I walked through. And that sinks in all the better because these maniacs let you go outside of their giant space station. The sense of scale and grandiosity that I said was so hard to do in a big building in a game, you finally get it here because we have a truly three-dimensional space. You don't just get keys that open doors, you use your scientific prowess to open airlocks, to traverse zero-gravity environments that have been absolutely devastated. If someone tells you that you need to go fetch them a tool from their office, you might get disoriented by the lack of gravity on the way. And it could be so easy to make a whole game with this floaty, dark, cosmic sensibility, but they never lose track of the simple and the human. The detail in the bathrooms and the little lived-in spaces are incredibly personable. You see the same desks, computers, and toolboxes over and over, but never with the same arrangement of junk, the same doodles on the whiteboards, the same computer screens speckled with dirt. It's so grounded that when you do run into a staggering display of scientific achievement, you marvel at the people who actually achieved this and the fact that they're now gone. I can show you the great detail work here, but what I can't communicate is the cohesion of everything. It's easy to lead players through a tightly structured series of flashy images, but it's incredibly impressive to create a dynamically evolving Metroidvania-style space that doesn't lose that sense of curiosity over a long playtime. One of the most demonized mechanics in modern 3D games is the old quest arrow, that little thing that makes you stop thinking and just go where the game tells you to. But even though I had that turned on for this experience, I didn't feel myself shutting off. I was always thinking about the next place I was going to, the character I'd read about who lived there, and what they were working on. Which isn't because I'm some big genius, I just had a really good map built into the game. This map is a graphic design masterclass. Splitting it into a detailed view and an overall view with incredibly precise line work and iconography is the kind of graphic design that this period is so innovative in. But it goes to show the cyclical relationship. You couldn't have a map this clean without thoughtfully designing these environments from the ground up, breaking them into subsets, and sandwiching simple floors on top of complicated ones. There's never too much to think about at once in the way that BioShock sometimes choked on its own ambition. See, this map makes the level look messier than it really is. When you walk through it, you find that there are natural human features like vantage points and staircases that help guide you from place to place. But as soon as the experience becomes a little bit too ambitious for the environment itself to dictate, you get this conspiracy theorist board of, oh my god, it's all connected! When I started reading about Art Deco, I couldn't see the forest for the trees. It felt recent enough in history that I didn't think of those people living fundamentally different lifestyles than I do now. But in studying these interiors, the crafting techniques that went into them, and playing games inspired by them, I've gained a greater appreciation for a style that seemed a little over the top for my taste at first. I hope you've found some inspiration that might help liven up a space that you inhabit, and be sure to tune in next week for my next video on, top 10 sexiest Doric columns in gaming. I don't know what the next one is yet, leave a comment.